Do Americans know the Constitution?
No.
Okay.
It's extremely important and useful for everyday life because it touches on every aspect.
Welcome
of
to
our
another
life.
episode of the Common Podcast. Guys, great episode. I know that y'all are going to enjoy it. More than enjoy it, I think this is a conversation that we really need to pay attention to. I think this is extremely important. It has a lot to do with the Constitution and our rights, and why is it important that we're aware of our rights, us as American, if you all American listening to this podcast right now. How important is it in your everyday life? More specifically, we talk about the 9th Amendment. For those of you that don't know the 9th Amendment, we get to explaining it very early on. That's how we introduce the conversation. But there is a lot of room for, I guess, manipulation when it comes to the actual literature. It seems very vague and very open for discussion where, you know, things can be misconstrued and tampered with depending on subjectivity. That is exactly what we talk about in this conversation. Honestly, I don't really talk too much because that's how great it was. The guest that we had on today is a former judge and is practicing as a lawyer currently. He has a plethora of accolades. I think you're all going to enjoy it. We do a grand introduction for him, and just to let you all know who we are talking to today. So if you are a new listener, you can find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and almost anywhere you can find podcasts. If you want to get in contact with us, maybe pitch an idea or even feature on the podcast, the best way to get in contact with us is through Instagram, and the handle is going to be The Real Common Podcast. That's going to be it for today, guys. I hope you all enjoy, and until next time, we'll catch you all.
On the track.
Welcome to the Common Podcast, where we speak upon common sense and realize it really isn't that common. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode. I'm so excited for y'all to tune into this. This was actually requested by a familiar face, which has been on the podcast maybe 5 times now. Before I introduce them, for the new listeners on today, you can find the podcast being The Common Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and almost anywhere else that you get your podcast. If you want to get in contact with us, pitch a topic, or maybe even want to feature on the podcast, the best way to do that is through Instagram, being The Real Common Podcast. And that familiar face now that I'm talking about is Mr.
Hey, what's up, Rogelio?
Italo. And we got a special guest today.
We do, man. If you'd allow me, Rogelio, I want to introduce
Go for it.
our listeners to our guest today. His name is Ysmael Funseca. He's born and raised in South Texas. He was a Rio Grande Valley son. He graduated from the University of Notre Dame with a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors, he says, in political science and Spanish literature, and that's in 2003. And then he went on for his Juris Doctor degree, also with honors. And in 2009, he finished that. Then he worked as a paralegal specialist for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., and assisted in the prosecution of civil cases with a particular focus in the prosecution of human trafficking offenses. He continued in public service while in law school through his work with the United States Attorney Office in McAllen, Texas, after his first year, and with Senator John Cornyn in the Judiciary Committee of the United States Senate after his second year. And during his law school years, Judge Fonseca, he's formerly a judge, we're going to see here in a minute, served in the Notre Dame Journal of Law Ethics in Public Policy as note editor, and in the Notre Dame Legal Aid Clinic as a student lawyer representing indigent clients in small estate guardianship and other probate matters. I'm assuming pro bono, right?
Yes.
Judge Ysmael, yeah. And then Ismael's career as an attorney began with his service as judicial law clerk for Judge Randy Crane of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas. He then continued his practice at Guerra Leeds, Sabo and Hernandez, PLLC, which is just Guerra and Sabo in McAllen, where he specialized in civil defense, municipal law, and small business and nonprofit representation. And from 2019, most recent history, to 2020, Ysmael was appointed by Greg Abbott to serve as judge of the 464th District Court of Hidalgo County, where he managed and presided over hundreds of criminal, family, and civil cases. Ismael was now, he now, after the election, went back to Guerra and Sabo, and he's practicing attorney there. Well, Ismael,
You don't have to read the whole thing.
this is really, no, we're done. We're done. We're all impressed already, right?
Yeah,
Raja?
I would say I didn't know all that stuff before getting you on here, and it's an honor to even have
Well, thank you
a
for having me.
conversation.
I appreciate,
Yeah, so
appreciate the opportunity of being here.
it looks young, but
Yeah.
for those watching the video, but he's an experienced
little
man.
white hair.
And a Jedi, I guess, as well. So, that wasn't. Did you think this whole thing? No, man. This is just because I could, I just summarized it there.
Summary.
That's your summary, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but like I said,
sounds
we're all impressed.
Italo sounds like a really big fan.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've been blessed. That's all I can say. I had some great opportunities, and really, always look forward to doing the best I can in the community. So awesome.
So, Raj, did I strong you arm into having this guest here? Because I
Yes.
think I probably
No.
did.
No, you introduced the topic, and I was very intrigued. So,
Okay.
not pulling my arm in any way. I'm always open to conversations like this, but you really wanted to specify.
Yeah, so let me ask the question.
okay.
Ismael, I have a question for you. To introduce our topic, you're a judge, you're a former judge, you're a practicing attorney.
Yeah.
I mean, someone from your school, from Notre Dame Law School, is now a Supreme Court Justice of the United States.
Amy
The Honorable Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so answer me this question. In your experience in practicing law since 2006 through 9, and your political science experience, and then later on your jurisprudence, do Americans know the Constitution?
No.
Okay. And
They have some basic understanding.
should they? Is it useful? Talk to me. Is it? Should Americans know the Constitution? And how do you think is it? Why should they? Is it useful for their everyday life?
It's extremely important and useful for everyday life because it touches on every aspect of our lives. I'm talking about just the federal Constitution, not to mention the state constitution and city charters and whatnot. But the federal Constitution sets just the ceiling of power that the federal government has. And I mean, you see it just on this label probably. There was some regulation about
This
why-
label.
yeah, the
He's
label.
holding up a water bottle, and
Water
he's saying
bottle.
the label on the water bottle.
I mean, I bet there are a lot of federal regulations that went into the design and ultimately the production of this water bottle. So, yeah, and how we're supposed to dispose of it. There's the Clean Waters Act, the federal law. Now, why do we have that law?
And the
It's-
Constitution can help me with that.
Actually, no.
No. Oh,
No,
okay.
It can't because it's not there. And that's part of the reason why we've had this conversation before about what the Constitution does and does not do. And so, yeah, the Constitution or the federal government has its hands in everything that we do. But to know whether or not that's appropriate, whether that's something that the government should be doing, we need to go and look back at our trusty old Constitution.
And that could affect my everyday life, whether I'm.
Great.
So this is not just for rich people.
No. On the contrary, if you're just a regular Joe on the street, you need to know what your right is to freedom of expression, to freely assemble with others, the freedom of the press, to be able to pick up a newspaper and not be hounded by police because you're reading the wrong thing, to all the way to making sure you're not arrested just because.
People don't
to
get
be
arrested
searched.
just because.
Well,
Come on, Judge.
maybe not now, but it can happen. I mean, look at history.
Yeah,
Look at
you're a
everything
judge. You would
and
know.
what's happened, across the world in generation after generation. There's always somewhere where you have despots, tyrants.
It almost sounds like you're saying that everyone here in the valley, when you drive north, you have to go to the checkpoint. Don't you have to go to the checkpoint?
Yeah.
The Border Patrol checkpoint. And it's not me. It didn't happen to me. It was a friend of mine. No, it's me. They asked me, for no reason, if they could check my trunk.
Right.
I mean, you know me, Ismael. I think I told you this story. Imagine my embarrassment when... Could I have reminded that gentleman of my constitutional rights at that moment?
Well, yeah, because you do have, let me read this. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's...
Yeah, I used the magic word that's in that amendment, by the way. So you're saying that everyday life, this is important. Like, so I used the magic word from the, there's a magic word in there.
Oh, well, do you want me to go through the rest?
Well, yeah.
Will not to be violated?
Yeah, in probable cause.
Yeah.
So when I said, all I said was like, probable cause. And that caught his attention.
Right.
And he immediately looked at me, and that conversation changed.
Right.
Immediately.
You think that was the identification of, oh, this person knows what he's talking about?
Yeah, he would be in trouble federally speaking, meaning what that gave me the right to do, the power to do. This is, however this encounter goes, this could end up in the news. This could end up all the way in Washington, D.C., just so you know. And if your everyday person looks at their life like this, that's what seems like you're saying, Ismael, that it is important for my everyday life. Like, because I have...
Yeah, because if you have a knowledge of what the Constitution does and what it's saying and declaring, then you're able to hold your government accountable. I mean, this is a government of the people, by the people. This isn't the government didn't just magically come into being and then say, you are now subject to me. The government is something that we as individuals set up, and we have this roadmap that is called the Constitution. And then government, this is what you can and what you cannot do.
All right, so...
People don't think of it that way.
And that's a great segue then into what I really want to talk about. It's the 9th Amendment of the Constitution.
Okay.
10 out of 10 people, like out of 10 people at home listening to us, how many do you think, let's do 100.
Out of 100 people?
Out of 100 people, how many do you think are like, oh, I know the 9th Amendment, based on your experience?
One.
1%.
Yeah.
Now,
People know about the First Amendment. That's the one everybody knows, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the Fourth Amendment, like the one I just read.
Yeah.
About having a warrant to be able to search.
That's right.
The Fifth Amendment.
They know the 5th because it's famous in movies.
Yeah, you got to plead the 5th.
Yeah,
so,
you got to plead the 5th.
So you know what that is.
Second Amendment's real popular right now.
Second Amendment.
Right, we did one. We did a show on that. But then there's this 9th Amendment.
There's a 9th Amendment.
Well, Ismael, what is the 9th Amendment? And what does it mean? Can you tell us?
So if you want, let's start with the text. And
yeah.
I'm an originalist. I'm a textualist.
Sweet.
That's my judicial philosophy.
Meaning what?
Which means you look at the statute, or in this case, the Constitution, and it only means what it says. So you look at the words, and then based on what it says, it gives you nothing more than what it says.
Sounds like you're saying they had like an intent when they wrote that.
No.
Like it's not a subjective thing. Like I can't just read and make up what it means.
No.
Oh.
You can't make things up.
There's like a fundamental meaning.
There are people that do feel that way, though.
They feel that way, though.
Their way of
that's a good choice.
Yeah, that's they feel that.
I feel like that's something that
they feel.
I feel like that's a trending thing right now. I think people play around with text a lot.
Right.
I mean, it's happened in religion too. You know, with the Bible.
What?
People do it. They
We've been doing it for ages.
Yeah.
You look at something like, well, this is what it actually means.
I feel says. Like I feel it means that.
So, but you have to look at, and then I'm sure we can talk about other specifics.
Yeah.
But what certain words mean. But at that time, when they were writing the Constitution, this is what they said. This is what they meant, because that's what it says. That's as simple as that. So that's what being an originalist, a textualist.
In the Supreme Court now, how many originalists or textualists do we have? In how many of the substantive due process theory, I don't know, do we have there?
We need a whole day to talk about substantive due process. But if we look at, generally speaking, I'd say we have 5.5. Just
5.5 persons.
Have?
Okay. Yeah. Well, because one, yeah.
There's sometimes you have one that kind of doesn't
Okay.
really.
He's a differentiated judge.
Right.
Pseudo-moralist or something?
No. He,
No,
tell us.
He's in. So, and I'm talking about Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah.
And a good man, intelligent
all of
man.
them, yeah.
Yeah, all of them are, and they're all there to serve our country in their capacity as judges on the Supreme Court. But sometimes I feel that he's looking more at preserving the integrity of the court, which is kind of a way of being an institutionalist. So when you're a little bit more worried about the institution itself than doing the right thing, then you're not really adhering to a particular judicial philosophy. You're now looking at something outside of what you're bound to protect, which is the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, so you would say there is an actual difference in the Supreme Court right now, which is you have 5.5 justices who are like, we are originalists, textualists, and then there's 3.5, 3.5 who would be like, well, we take a little more subjective, a little more subjective approach to this.
They look at the Constitution as a living and breathing document, which changes as our society changes.
Changes with the seasons, so
We
to
change,
speak.
as the words change meaning, as our desires change, as our needs change, then I change what he means.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so good. Ninth Amendment.
So the Ninth Amendment. So
Yeah.
a little detour. So the Ninth Amendment says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
What does that mean?
So just because the Constitution doesn't have or doesn't say that you have a certain right, doesn't mean that you've lost rights that you have, that you naturally have. It's very simple. Just because it's not here doesn't mean they don't exist. Your rights.
Does that blow your mind, Roger?
It does. Like I told Italo before going live, to me, it seems very vague, right? Like something that, right, that it's just not specific enough to kind of pinpoint, like,
So
okay,
that's-
well, what human rights and...
Yeah, it sounds to you, it sound like, go ahead.
But that's where originalism comes in. And how do you look at the text? So
to clarify, Roger, it sounds like what you're saying is someone could just come up with some rights,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're not enumerated. Let's start enumerating some out of my whatevers. That's where
yes, to
it
clarify.
becomes like, now I can, oh man, you just opened the door to subjectivism for me. Existentialism,
Yeah, exactly.
experientialism.
Not saying that
whatever
I would do that,
do,
but I can see how there can be
Okay.
a hole in the...
But then again, let's start with the premise that the Constitution doesn't give rights. Okay?
Okay, interesting.
The Constitution doesn't give you a right to anything.
which would be what the Ninth Amendment is saying.
Right.
Okay.
It's saying we're not denying that you have a right to X. We're not disparaging those rights. We're just listing some of the rights here because they necessarily have to be addressed because we're like the right to vote. It necessarily has to be addressed here because you're voting for the legislature, for the members of the House and for President of the United States. So yeah, we have that right. It's being specifically enumerated in here, or in the First Amendment, you know, the right to free speech. That's being specifically enumerated. Mm-hmm. But why? Because we want to either limit the power of the federal government, or we're giving the federal government one, or sharing a right, or giving it a certain power. Mm. So if we're not talking about those rights, then it doesn't mean anything. The federal government can't just say, oh, no, that's not a right. Or yes, that's a right. It has no word, it has no say in what is a right, because it's not specifically enumerated.
Yeah, so
So that's why it's important. The Ninth Amendment is important because it specifically tells you the people keep their rights. We're not, when we're creating this government back in the 18th century, we're not taking anything away. We're not giving anything. We're just setting out this structure of what the federal government is.
Okay.
okay,
That's it.
so let's use an easy one. Do like a non-enumerated, right? Does the Constitution text actually talk about liberty? Does it use the word liberty? I think it does, doesn't it? On the preamble, maybe. Or?
It's in the Declaration of
Well, okay, so
It's
it's
in
a
the
Declaration of
Declaration.
Independence.
Yeah.
Now, that's not in the Constitution, though.
I don't believe the word liberty is actually
Yeah.
in the Constitution. No.
So I have no liberty.
It is.
That's what the Ninth Amendment is
Right.
doing about. They're saying because the Constitution doesn't say you have liberty, doesn't mean you lost your liberty.
Right.
And liberty, Ismael, it's not just it's not autonomy. Right? I can do whatever I want. Liberty at the
Right.
time was a locomotion, right? Liberty, like to come and go as I please. I don't have I don't need a license to be here at Rogelio's house.
Right.
I can just
and
go
actually,
to it.
let me. I may have to correct myself. On the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment
Ah, okay.
does mention life, liberty, or property. No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or
Which came
or
after
property.
the Civil
but
War.
that came after the Civil War, after the Constitution. had
Because
already
that was
been
in an
enacted.
environment where states could actually disparage people's persons without due process
Well, we know what-
of their right
well-
of citizenship and whatnot.
We know what happened. What
Correct.
Civil War happened. So
Yeah.
it was important. The 14th and the
So
15th.
what's a non-numerated right that we can?
There's one, for example, that we've talked about.
Yeah,
you
go
know,
ahead.
about being able to educate your children,
Hmm.
for example. I mean, for time immemorial, parents, have had the right to determine how best to educate their children, how to teach them about faith, how to teach them about civil law, about anything really. That's not something in the U.S. Constitution.
It wasn't the Harlingen Independent School District that gave me that right?
No.
Oh my goodness.
So we as a people, we established school districts, right? And we've allowed that because we want to have a system of education, presumably. But
Yeah, we as the parents would have established their relationship
Right.
as the sovereigns on that
Exactly.
relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, we have to look at different levels of government. But there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution. There's not a single word in the U.S. Constitution that gives the federal government the right to tell you how to teach your children, what to teach your children.
What about the curriculums? Like who controls curriculums? Because that, in a sense, does kind of,
Right.
does control what your child learns, and it is a law for your child to go to school, get some type of curriculum education. So,
Not the federal
Okay,
Constitution.
okay.
I mean, if you go in the states, so we don't want to get into the 10th Amendment today.
No, not
but
the minute,
but the 10th Amendment reserves rights to the states. So
Yeah.
so the states, we gave to the state certain powers and rights as well as we did to the federal government.
Yeah, and maybe Ismael even and I talked about this, but I'm big on jurisdictions and lesser magistrates. There's a doctrine for that too, and by doctrine I mean like an ethics and a legal, government, a politic doctrine for what is a lesser magistrate and how important is he and what is his sphere of sovereignty and so forth. So, are you a husband?
I am
I'm a father. He's a father. We're governors. So we are a lesser magistrate in a sense that I do have civil relationships with my family, and I have a level of sovereignty there. But these are parts of theories that we would discuss. But that's important because the world of the Constitution exists. Like the world of the Constitution is in these terms. Those are the terms of the world of the Constitution, right, Ismael? Like the Ninth Amendment opens the window for you to understand what are your rights. That you have some right. Like there's a magic wand out there that an elected official waves, and he gives you a right.
Mm-hmm.
You have those rights.
Right.
And I think, I'm free to say that. We have those rights because God has given us those rights. And the civil magistrate simply recognizes it. He recognizes that they have those rights. And the civil magistrate itself, so the government itself, be it federal, state, or local, what they are doing is recognizing that they have a duty given by God as the government to have the environment where I can exercise these rights. And every time, because we're not universes into ourselves, right? Our civil lives, they bump into each other. So when that happens, we need a civil law. So that's why liberty, for instance, liberty is interesting. There wasn't a law. Actually, there might have been regulations in the books back in the day for horse ownership and for how to care for a horse or for how to ride a horse and stuff like that. But certainly today for cars.
Right.
But I still have the God-given right to come and go as I please. Like I didn't get, I don't have to get a license from the government to leave the state of Texas.
Right.
I can just get in my car and drive. But because we now drive at 85, 90 miles an hour, it was good for all of us. It seemed good to all of us that we should hey, let's make some
rules,
some civil rules to keep things civil.
Let's put some stop signs, put some traffic lights,
right?
people aren't running into each other.
Let's agree that if you're, you have to be able to see where you go.
Right.
Where if you were blind before, you get up on a horse and wherever it takes you, you're good.
There you go.
It's much different.
Yeah.
So, but all these things are in the world of the Constitution.
Right.
So,
and the Ninth Amendment. So, going back to how this seems like a pretty vague term, and originalism gives you the tools to be able to understand what these terms mean, and we look at the time, society, the American history, tradition, to determine, well, what is it? And, you go back to the natural law, you go back to our God-given rights as they were being recognized. So the common law at the time that the Constitution was written gives us the tools to understand, well, what is it that our founding fathers meant by having these unenumerated rights? And that's the basis. So you look at, and I'm sure a lot of people recently have been hearing about the Dobbs case, about
the overturn of Roe versus Wade.
The overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Maybe.
I'm sure everybody's heard about it. And that's exactly the analysis that Justice Alito went through and talking about, well, we talked in Roe v. Wade about this right to an abortion. Well, how did we get there? And he looks back at the history and says, well, there was never a right to an abortion because it was criminalized. It was a crime for a doctor to perform an abortion up until just even in most states, I think it was just one or two states in the 70s that allowed abortion. Every other state in the nation, it's going back over 100 years, had criminalized abortion. So if we look back at the Constitution, look at when it was enacted, there was never such a right. So that was the focus and the analysis that Justice Alito made in the Dobbs case, and that's what originalism does.
So what
it
he's
goes
saying
back
is
and
that
looks at the common law.
Saying is that when the Ninth Amendment says the fact that there isn't a right here doesn't mean that this person doesn't have a right. What that would mean for the abortion case then is that I don't have to enumerate the right of this baby in here.
Right.
The baby has that right, whether I enumerate it or not.
Right.
But what has happened what has happened on the other hand is that people say, oh, no, you have the right to kill a baby in the womb. to murder a baby.
And that was one of the arguments in Roe v. Wade.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They created that right. They created a right to have an abortion mill.
And that was one of the arguments that they made in Roe v. Wade, is that, I mean, among other arguments, was that the Ninth Amendment, because they have this vague term, and that not all rights are specifically enumerated, well, there you go. There you have it. That's
This
where
is
we
huge.
find it.
That's huge.
Now,
This is
that's
huge.
not what the court said in Roe v. Wade. They found it under a different clause, which we could talk about for days, endless due process. But going back to the Ninth Amendment, the court never said that that was what it was, one. And two, if we go back using the judicial philosophy of originalism, we don't see that in the common law. We look at American history. The common law, it's not there.
Yeah, and these individual rights in common law going all the way back, they go all the way back to the 13th century at least.
Right.
To the Magna Carta.
You need to go back and to really understand
Good rights, like God-given rights, right?
Exactly.
Okay, this blows my mind because what the Ninth Amendment is saying, so based on the perversion of these non-enumerated rights, like if that was your fear, Raj, that someone could just create some rights.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I have the right, you have 3 bedrooms in your house? There's a non-enumerated right here. You have too many bedrooms. Someone who has none has the right to at least one. So if I can create, that was your fear.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, unless the government says that you are a person, you probably are not a person. I mean, that's the idea then. Right? Like taking this all the way, Ismael?
Right.
If the government doesn't say I have the right to be a person, I'm not a person. If the government doesn't... Oh, marriage is a great one, actually. If the government doesn't say I have the right to be married, maybe I'm not married.
Right. But again, we have to go back to that basic premise, and it's what I tell everybody. The Constitution doesn't give you rights.
Correct.
Period.
Okay.
There isn't such a thing as a constitutional right. You have rights recognized by the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have rights given to you by the Constitution. Period. It's that simple. So just because it's not on here doesn't mean you don't have it. So yes, marriage. I guess that would be one of them.
Well, absolutely.
Right.
I
the
guess
Ninth Amendment.
I have to go ask for permission to be married.
No, you shouldn't.
Exactly.
Now, you do, if you get married in a church, as some of us do.
Yeah.
Then,
And then
the
your license
government
gets correct.
the government recognizes that as your marriage.
Yeah. And that's
Right.
a civil law
Right.
agreement.
Right.
For the government, like, oh, I'm going to recognize your marriage because it's in the interest of public policy. Because you
Right.
might have a farm, and if someone dies, I need to know who it belongs to, and
Who's gonna be inherit
this.
Right.
And before you can find, the pastor who married is dead.
Right.
Your witnesses have all moved. By the time you get them, the cows are dead, the chickens are dead, and the corn is rotten.
Yeah. I mean, there's a purpose
makes
for
sense.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, so there you
That's
go.
interesting.
You
Yeah.
think so, Roger? You think this
Yeah,
is...
that's very interesting. So, well, somebody couldn't just claim that they're married. Is that what you're saying?
The opposite, probably.
Yeah.
Someone could just go, I'm a pastor. Someone have the right, God-given, fundamentally, to come to me and say, marry us. And by the God-given law of marriage, I will marry them. And they are married. And what they do at the justice of the peace is for the government to recognize they're married, so that they can live in the politic, so they can live in the city, so that there is a testament now that certifies that they are married, so that if there's a dispute that relates to their marriage, then we have a proof. Witness. We have a witness.
Okay.
So they're just recognized. So the same way as the birth certificate is simply recognizing with witnesses that this is my child. It's undisputable. It's self-evident. Like I didn't have to go to court. So this is why I wanted to have this conversation with Ysmael, because if if the culture goes the way of Roe versus Wade being a right that exists, but it's not enumerated, then think of this absurdity. I have a child, you and I, our wives are pregnant. We have a baby. I have to go to a court and appear before a judge so that I can argue my case for this child to be my child. Because the government has to give me the right. The government has to make this person my child. Because they're not, until they say it is. But that's not what the Constitution is saying. Like, not even close to that. The Constitution is saying, no, God has made this your child. Where are the witnesses? We're just going to recognize it. It doesn't change. If I take my child, take him to an island, and I decide to live like the family Robinson there, they never cease to be my children because there's no government. Right. That's what we're saying.
And you have the right to take your children and live on an island.
And I have the right to do that.
Right.
And no one can take that away from me. And that's what the Ninth Amendment is talking about. And that's why the Constitution exists then. Okay.
Well,
so
it protects you from overreach, government overreach. From the government doing too much or doing more than what you've allowed it to do.
now, Raj, I've heard you say this on one of our podcasts, and this is good for you. Is that you like fundamental things. So Ismael, so it's like, would you agree then, and why is it that you agree with that maybe? This is not the agree question yet. But that the Ninth Amendment reaches into something that is like beyond material reality. Like it's transcendental. Like it's beyond just material things. It reaches into something that's beyond material things and says, this is where your rights are.
Why?
No, is that what the Ninth Amendment does? Do you agree with that? Okay.
Well, yeah, because just like we talked about parental choice, marriage, the life of the preborn. I mean, you can go on. This isn't just talking about, can I read this book or not? Can I go outside and protest? It touches the very personal, intimate aspects of our lives. And there was no need to enumerate them in the Constitution because whether we have a Senate, a House, whether we have judges, a president, and whether they regulate interstate commerce has absolutely nothing to do with those intimate parts of our family lives or personal lives at all.
Yeah. So I have those rights.
Yeah.
Transcendentally, they're immaterial. They're based in something that is beyond material reality, and that is in direct contrast, Rogelio, with Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and anyone, as we have talked about, anyone trying to take away our Second Amendment rights, because I have the right given by God to protect my own life. So anyways, my question is this.
Yeah.
So not knowing the Constitution then, expand on this for us a little bit.
Okay.
Even more, perhaps. Maybe give us some practical things here. Not knowing the Constitution then could cost you your life, your liberty, and your property. Do you agree with that statement? Do you disagree with that statement? And why? Like, not knowing the Constitution then could cost you. Like, it could cost you your life, your liberty, and your property.
Well, yeah. If you don't know that you have the right.
So you agree with it?
Yeah.
Or why? Then tell us some specific things like that you've observed.
Because then you can't exercise your right. For example, if the government passed a law saying you cannot have a single weapon in your home, and you just go along with it, you don't realize that you have your Second Amendment right, and you have someone try to break into your home with a gun, well, then you didn't know that you could own your own and try to protect your family because you didn't know that you had the Second Amendment right. I mean, it sounds extreme, but that's an easy example of...
I'm from Brazil. That sounds very real.
But if people don't know that they have the Second Amendment right, then they can just sit there and be sitting ducks. I mean, didn't we have someone... Wasn't there something in... I think it was in Houston at a graduation party where someone showed up and started shooting at people.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was a woman that actually had a gun with her.
There's so many of
Oh,
those.
wow.
And she stopped the man from making a bigger...
Yeah, the church case. There's a church
The
case.
church case, that's right, yeah. I forgot about that one.
It's on video.
Because there was a gentleman with a gun in the church
Yeah.
that was able to stop the threat.
Yeah, and
Because-
even,
but they
even
knew.
Uvalde, right? Even Uvalde,
Yeah.
the story is the Border Patrol office borrows the
Yeah.
shotgun from the barber, goes
Right.
in there and saves his family.
Right.
I mean,
But they knew that they have a right to bear arms, and they were able to exercise a right and protect those that they loved. If we didn't know that, then hey, I'd be walking around without a gun, just hoping that I'm not going to get shot. And what about First Amendment? If we don't know that the government can't regulate what's in a newspaper, then the newspaper can become government propaganda, as it happens across the world.
Yeah.
It's happened in history. We know that.
repeatedly,
It's
yeah.
so if we don't know that, then we just let things be. We let those that are in power determine what to do with that power. If we didn't have a right to express ourselves on, hey, I want to wear a shirt with the candidate of my choice, and somebody with a gun or a badge says, you can't be wearing that in here.
Yeah,
If I don't know that, I'm like, okay, well, let me turn it inside out. Well, no, you have a right to wear that shirt, as offensive as that may be. So yeah, you need to know.
God-given right, yeah.
You need to know what the Constitution says, what it allows. Also, when the government passes passes laws, it enacts laws that affect your business.
My God-given right to provide for my family.
Right. You have a right to set up a business. You have a right to provide for your family, to work.
Yeah, like I think during COVID, right? I think a lot of Americans allowed the government to say to them that, you know what, we give you the right to go to work and provide for your family, so we're taking it away.
Right. That was one. Yeah, that was one of the big things.
Yeah,
when COVID started.
to what a constitutionalist would say, no, you didn't give me that right. I have that right.
Right.
It's self-evident. It's self-evident that I have it. Okay, so Ninth Amendment is is of the essence then.
Yeah. People need to know that they need to know what their rights are so that they can protect them. That's short and simple.
From tyranny and being manipulated, as Italo's story said, because if Italo wasn't well read in his rights, because I'm pretty sure that Border Patrol didn't expect for someone to be, knowledgeable on their rights, and so I'm pretty sure he did that to maybe 20 other people that day, and they didn't question it. They're like, okay.
Everybody's like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it's in my mind, knowing history, it's a great risk. Especially, the more I show up my face here in this podcast and say stupid stuff, the more
Well, in
the more
today's
risk
today's
the more
day and
risk
age,
I
it's
have.
stupid, right?
Right. Yeah. No. So I do think that is a real, for you to have an understanding of what the Constitution is doing, that it is not giving you your rights, that you have rights that are given by the Creator, by God, that you have, and the Constitution is just enumerating some of them so that we can have a civil magistrate. It's a covenant that we have with the people who are elected,
And we look at that, and that's one of the reasons we had a revolution.
yeah.
That's the reason we're not English subjects today, is because our founding fathers recognized that, and they put in the Declaration, and it's specifically stated that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, not specifically or not just these, Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They recognize it. And that's why we have a revolution.
And that was the bit that I wanted to bring. That's the only way I can explain to you, to anyone. If someone asks me like, man, you really like this one or that right or this right or this right. You like it so much that you're willing to die for it. I was like, how come? Well, that's why I said it's because it's not based on this material realm. It's not just a materialistic right that I had someone say, oh, it seems good to us since you've elected us that you should have this right. I was like, no, my creator, like there's something transcendental here that I'm dealing with, that I have, that I'm just not going to lose.
Right.
And I'm willing to go to the other side for this. I'm willing to die to have it. And that's the world of the Constitution. So
yeah, we need to recognize that there's a hierarchy in the law. And it starts with God, the creator, that then gives us rights, that then gives us the right to cede some rights or give permission to bear over those rights to the next level of government, and then to the next. And then at the bottom, we have the federal government.
Interesting. People have that.
Oh, it's backward.
Backwards.
yeah.
It completely.
Right. So
We have the great old federal government
at the top,
telling the states what to do, which in turn tell local authorities what to do, to rule over our families and ourselves. And then we have our faith at the bottom.
And you pay
to
for
the
it.
side.
Interesting.
And I pay for it. Yeah, and
So-
I think that in the Roe versus Wade is actually exactly that case, is the federal government telling a state that they cannot protect within their realm their people with their right to life. And by their people, I mean the babies in the womb. So there you go. Ninth Amendment.
That's the Ninth Amendment.
Unless, Ismael, any closing thoughts? Because
I think you started off with a very good question, which is why we need to know our rights or what the Constitution says. And it's precisely because that's the only way that we can protect ourselves from an overreaching government.
all right, that's it, Rosetta. Ninth Amendment, man.
Very important.
Ninth Amendment.
I enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot.
Well,
Good.
Ismael, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Ismael. Right, the younger you are when you learn this stuff,
Oh, the better it is.
The better it is. Because I probably learned too late.
It's never too late
Yeah.
to know what's in this,
That's right. So
in this
anyways.
important document.
Hope this was good.
Yeah.
Hope it was informative.
Thank you
Sure.
for jumping on the show. I appreciate it. Italo.
Anytime.
You're always appreciated. Always.
Thanks.
Anytime. Well, I might take you on that offer. Y'all heard it. So if y'all have any other topics that you would like for us to cover, if you had any comments, concerns, you can definitely leave that in the comments below. Also, Instagram, you can contact us there. For all the new listeners, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, almost anywhere else that you can find your podcast. Also, Patreon, which I'm going to shout out. I'm going to start using Patreon again. So for people who aren't familiar, it's the first link in the description. Go check that out. Exclusive content on there. Thank you all so much once again. And we'll catch you all in the next episode. Thank you.
On the track.